In English, okay, fine. Hello, good afternoon, or rather good evening for those who are having dinner already, which is not the case of Spain, where we broadcasting from Madrid. This first session or introductory session um, of the Dreamhammer series of urban social design, in which we are going to feature to present the urban public space and people experience, which is, as you know, um, a rather innovative way of shedding light over different issues related with urban planning, with participation, with public space around the project that Ecosistema Urbano is developing in Hamar, Norway. Um, this is one of the three other projects that we have working on of the USD, the Urban Social Design line. And what we want to do today, after yesterday's interaction with most of the participants in the group, is a bit to go through the main issues, the main aspects that we're going to deal with in the course, and also introduce some of the features, some of the topics that are of interest to our participants, which we have the chance of meeting yesterday. Juan, ¿me puedes poner esto creador de? Yeah. Okay, so sorry, I'm dealing with Francesco, which is here helping me to see how we can deal with this software and the screen, which he masters, but I don't. So I'm going to try to pull full screen on the slide. There we go. So we're saying we're definitely trying to work with the notion of public space and with different definitions of public space. Oh. Could you listen to it? We seem to have a problem. But should I go on? Sigo? Okay, so hopefully we are connected. I was saying that we're going to start working with some interesting definitions, some interesting concepts about public spaces and people, which is the notion of public space and social space, the notion of public sphere, which has been used by different theorists, and I'm thinking now in David Harvey from a social geography or human geography point of view. A lot of work on trying to understand the different relations, social relations, class relations around public space and public sphere from a historical perspective. So I would like to provide this approach too, like as on a historical perspective, trying to understand how urban space has been very important in different moments of history, in different periods, and in different places, because history always, sort of comes back, and we can think that public space is really something that is used in a similar way within hundreds of years, within different contexts, within different resources on the part of the people that are using that. As an example, I would say, with the logic differences, but with all those things in common, that if you read A Tale of Two Cities by Charles Dickens, in the beginning of the book, there is a description, a very interesting description of how the people of Paris are just running in the streets of Paris. They're rioting and they're going towards the Bastille to seize it, but they really don't know what's going on. There's not a plan. They don't really know the folk, the people running in the streets, workers, middle class. They really don't know. They don't have a program. And what they know is that they are scared. They are very excited. They are doing something different, and that they don't know what that's going to end with. There's a complete uncertainty. So that's the condiments for revolution. And to some extent, we have the public space plays a very important role in that process, in that amazing catharsis of people. Um, if we jump from 1789 to our year, to 2011, we have similar feelings for instance, in Tahrir Square in Egypt, in which thousands and thousands marched against the police and marched towards the city center, the symbolic center of the city. And the feelings that people mention, that people describe, are those of someone who is very scared, who doesn't know what's exactly going on, who is has for the first time in in their lives, for a lot of people, because we are talking about a very big but very young population. For the first time in life, they're able to maybe not to take decisions, because decisions were not taken, and this is not a planned process, but still to know what they don't want, and to try to define a way of challenging. If it's marching in the streets, if it's confronting the riot squads, if it's meeting, it is often breaking the law in all these cases. But what they know is that there's something that is changing, and what they know is that they don't know where things are going, but they know where they want them to go. So I think this is a good introduction to talk about those this historic evolution of public space and people in terms of how space has been used. So in the first session, we have a look to that, and we'll try to also be very empirical, very practical, and approach the real use of space, public space, in time. Also, we will look at, as I was saying before, some concepts that like public space, social space, public place, placemaking, things like that, which I think are very useful to understand what we're talking about, and to be able to elaborate more complicated or more complex proposals or theories around this particular issue, which is not simple at all. It's very important, it's very crucial for people's life, it's very crucial for cities' life, but it's anything but simple. It's of a very high complexity, although being complex and looking simple is not always a very good virtue, because you are often neglected and are often tackled with very little imagination. This is at least the case for my country, Spain, or for, I guess, other countries in the environment. A certain lack of imagination in operating at the public space, in defining the public space, in understanding the public space, and in trying to model the public space for the specific uses, which are initially positive and constructive for society. What else? Hold on, please. Okay. So that would be the first section. I would like also to introduce gradually some of the topics that we were discussing yesterday with the participants in this session, which very, very gradually impressed both Francesco and me about the quality of their proposals, the enthusiasm, their variety of their origins, and I'm hoping to have a really very, very fruitful session. Sorry. So the second session we're going to deal with something which is quite relevant, but we're not used to think about. Public spaces are often thought to have very clear functions, very clear role in our daily life in urban space. Therefore, we want to highlight what are the real functions of public spaces, but also those potential functions. And this is where we can be more creative and um, more intense in the what would be the real functions, some of the real functions of the public space? Well, we probably will be talking about those functions that a lot of people perform in public space, but also we have to think in those other functions that are made invisible for the vast majority of users of public spaces, or are invisible for um, the agencies or organizations that take part in the management of the public space. So on the one side, we could say that there are some formal functions of public spaces and some informal um, functions of public space. And also we can say that there are some potential functions of public space. So we have a threefold um, three bunches of functions, of potential functions. Whatever is real functions, well, mainly it's leisure. It has an environmental function to contribute to reduce contamination or palliate contamination. Um, there's also, so we're saying a function of interaction, a function of leisure, a function of exercise, a function, I would say, a landscape function in which green spaces, public spaces, not necessarily green, play a role in this field, in this sense. And this is more or less most of the real or the um, formal functions. Um, Other functions, what kind of functions we can think about public spaces if we took them from an informal point of view? Um, what goes on in public spaces? Thinking of square, in a boulevard, in a park, in a garden square, for instance. What things that are in the realm of informal economy take place? Well, you can find anything there. You can find from activities which are openly legal, others which are tolerated, and definitely what you find is generally that a lot of these activities are having carried on in that very place for years and years or even decades. We're talking about prostitution, um, maybe selling some sort of objects which are forbidden, or providing services like shoe cleaning or stuff like that. So those would be the informal aspects of public space, how people interact in an informal way. Not to speak, of course, about drug dealing and other kind of activities. There is a lovely book by Sudhir Venkatesh, which is an American sociologist from Columbia, um, and Sudhir writes this book which is called Out of the Books, I think, and it's about a ghetto in Chicago, how it operates. It's a kind of ethnography or sociological research, qualitative research of an immense quality. And often he describes what goes on in the squares or in the little parks in the neighborhood, which are often also the uh, the outcome of conflicts, whose possession is the outcome of conflicts, of tension, confrontation, even fights or deaths in exchange. So what in this book, what you have is the people, which is a Afro-American community outside of Chicago, have some of them are mechanics, but they don't have a space to work, so they just take the cars to the park, which is an open space, and a back with the tools, and they would start mending the cars in the public space. So that's a use which is probably illegal, but it's not only tolerated but appreciated by the locals because it's a place, it's a kind of economic activity area, and also the park feels safer because they like to have someone taking care of other things and being there looking. Um, so that would be one of the elements of this an example of this informal activity, jointly, of course, with drug dealing or other activities. So what would be the real ones? What would be the real ones? Not necessarily the formal ones, but the real ones. As we were saying before, of course, interaction among people, exercise, etc. But then we have also that some of the classic functions of of public space might be suddenly enhanced or reinforced in a dramatic way. And I'm thinking how people coming from different countries in most Spanish cities would gather on weekends or Thursdays or weekends to meet each other, to exchange, to buy, to sell, to see, to look, to find, to meet, to do anything generally only with people of their own community. Their other communities are not attracted to these specific environments. Finally, there's also a section of potential functions, which maybe should be thought about in terms of those things that happen in public spaces but are not necessarily programmed or thought about. So we have set from people using the public spaces to just hang out or enjoy or chill out, to people making of their public spaces a regular meeting place. And I'm thinking about again these groups of people from Ecuador, Peru, or Bolivia that meet in some Spanish parks and exchange anything which is exchangeable, in a sense, services, words, products, etc. What is important is that these congregations of people, these groups of people that might range to a few hundreds, are incredibly disturbing for neighbors. Often, of course, for non-Latin American, in the case of Ecuadorians, no Latin American neighbors, but they feel like that having nearby one of these parks with hundreds, even a couple of thousands of people on weekends having fun and eventually also getting drunk, which is more noisy, they would just ask it to vanish, to disappear. Other potential functions that we can think from public spaces are those who are that consist in appropriations in changing the use or rather the fate of empty plots in the center of the city, to provide certain resources to the people that are in most need. I say most need, I'm talking generally about homeless people. So homeless people, why do they gather in public spaces? And especially, why do they gather in public spaces in the center? Well, basically because the public spaces are open spaces. There you can put your stuff and your stuff and try to increase your resources, access to food, to cheap food, to waste. You can order in asking bars to give them the leftover. You can also have shelter. Eventually, you can maybe do something or find some corner in the square or in public space that would give you both shelter and on the other hand luck or security. Because of course, if you live in a public space, if it's not very dark, you might feel much more protected because someone would see something happens to you. But I think these are elements that are especially important to understand the functions of public space.
We have a question about bibliography. Could you write down the book reference?
Yeah. Okay, someone's asking me to give a book reference. Let me have a look to it because I found the other day a really nice article by David Harvey, which is in his own website. I think it's really worth having a look to it, and it didn't actually had a reference of where has it been published before. Try to find it. Okay, there we go. Oh, I don't have a chat now, have I?
Yes, you have, I think.
Let me pull out the chat, or let me Francesco pull out the chat for me. We seem to have been having problems with the sound. Okay, hope your sound is reaching you properly because I can think that must be a nightmare to listen to me and also have a bad noise or noisy environment. And I'm sorry, I apologize for that. Although I have no clue what's going on. You know, some technology sometimes plays tricky. So also we are we have to mention the some of the elements that were introduced yesterday by our colleagues before we go on with the display or the mention of the course, the summary course. Some of the elements that came out yesterday have to do with most of the issues I have talked about in this introduction. The notions and the incentives to use the public space. Firstly, there was this idea which is very basic, which is there's a lack of relation, there's a gap between public space designer, namely engineers or sorry, architects, or in a lesser extent engineers, and the people, the users, the people that are going to enjoy those public spaces. In that sense, I have to say that I had this very interesting experience last week when I was in Berlin, which I went to see different parks, thinking in you, thinking in this course. And it was very interesting how the parks in the city of Berlin all of them are different. When I say parks, I refer to playgrounds, which I think is one of the key fundamental public spaces we can think about in the city, because they are schools of I would say there might be schools of civism, schools of urban planning, schools of thought, of behavior. There are places in which a lot of things happen, even if we just see our kids playing for a few minutes or for an hour or two and then go back home. But it's very, very important to understand the role of public space in a city, and specifically of playgrounds. So one of the things that were mentioned yesterday is how the playgrounds should adapt or should suit the needs of the real users, the needs of the kids or young people. That's another issue. There's very few facilities for young people, and certainly young people would love to have their own playground adapted to their needs of to their size, their strength, their their requirements for interact with other groups, so on and so forth. So key issue that puts together the functions dimension of this public space and the differences between that come out between design and use, which are always or often neglected because generally the person is or the organization is in charge of setting up of deciding a public space, in this case a playground. It's a politician or someone who doesn't really need to know a lot about what he's doing. What do I have to answer?
Sorry?
There's a question?
No. No.
Okay.
I just invite everybody.
Okay. So this is some of the elements. Also, we have some very interesting elements of definition, some proposals of definition of public space. And we were talking about public and private space, how private space can be make public or make feel like public, although it's still private. It's very exclusive in a lot of cases, and sometimes it's even illegal to isolate it from other social activity or social interaction. And unfortunately, this is a thing that is proliferating, that it's expanding very much surely in Spain, probably in a lesser extent in Europe. But of course, it's one of the engines of urban growth in the United States. And this is something I think, my personal opinion, we Spanish, I think we have a sort of a new rich syndrome through which we tend to like to do things in a very straightforward way, and not than forward, in a big way, in which quantity is very important, size is very important, size does matters. So we have an issue in Europe, and specifically in the south of Europe, about whether private space which are made public are efficient, and especially if they are sustainable. So we like to have a look to those variables, because one thing is talking about public space and people and thinking in positive and just saying where to do something and try to do. But another thing which I think is very fruitful is to think of those experiences you're not happy with. Why do they happen? How people react to them? How do they success or fail? Etc. And because they're products, generally they're products of the time, and they need to be understood as such, as very crystal guide maps to understand the real substance of a particular problem. Another issue that we would like to Okay. I'm looking at this question. Shall I read on?
Yes.
Always Curitiba in our lives. He's talking about waste management system on Curitiba, Brazil, in which people pick up trash and get paid with bus tickets very informally and allowed by the city council. This is probably something in which we're talking about an informal use of some aspects of public space. And in this case, we're talking about something which is management or even appropriation of a public good or negative public good or a devalued public good, which is waste, is trash. I think it's very interesting because in a lot of countries, of developing countries, the waste collection is still something which is profitable for very low rent groups, and they have an added value, very small added value, I would say, per operation or per worker, but a huge added value in the long run, because of course you cannot sustain a city without getting and processing the trash. This is also the case of Cairo, in which Assam probably is acquainted with. There is a group of people which have a very low status in society, which have big trucks, and they just gather around the bags and the waste of any sort, and then they sort of process it and distribute it. I don't know whether we are talking exactly about public space, but we're talking about something that has an influence in public space for sure. Okay, another issue that we would like to look at with more time is these ideas of public space and participation. Um, Public space and people, it's a key scenario to talk about or to think about public space and people. Um, I'm glad that Eva is listening to us better now. Welcome back. So, public space and participation. Why it is important? How to do it in a relevant way or with an impact? Um, and how can we make it sustainable? These are three questions around the notion of participation in public space that can range, and we link this with what we were saying before with the potential functions of public space. Can be from a very standard process of participation in which citizens are asked what kind of trees they want, or if they like the shape of the benches and stuff like that. Or it can go to an urban design process. That's what we're here actually. That's what we're doing with Hamar, in which you have the chance of contributing to a process of design of a space that you might not be able to see directly in person, but certainly you have a lot of information and a lot of inputs on the evolution of the process so far. So this is a very interesting way of participation. It's a new way of participation. It's rather, I would say, innovative. It definitely is for me, and in the field I come from, is something which has not been tried before. But why is participation important? Participation is important because it gives the citizens or residents, if they're not citizens and they live on their authoritarian rule, it gives them the chance of taking decisions, of organizing, of managing to some extent pieces of the city which are very tiny, are often irrelevant in terms of budget, in terms of public policy, in terms of design, etc., but are incredibly valuable in terms of interaction. I'm referring to those micro public spaces that don't need to be a huge square, the ones we're looking here, Trafalgar Square or Piccadilly, but are more maybe a small square in the neighborhood, or a small park in the neighborhood, or a lane that can be used as a pedestrian walk or a cycling walk. Those elements are key for participation. Oh, sorry, I would formulate. It is key for those elements, for the outcomes of the process, to have a participative approach, which requires time, maturity, some money. It requires a lot of elements, a lot of sacrifice and commitment from both parts. What else to mention about participation is also very important because it is a way in which the civil society, the grassroots organizations, have the chance of intervening directly in the public space, in the city. There is, in my case in Spain and in other places, there has been a tradition of a pressure which is now flourishing here, but has flourished before in other places. There's a tradition of participating, of taking part in the design of public spaces, like giving opinions, choosing projects among different options, discussing with the stakeholders. I mean, there are stakeholders themselves with other stakeholders, and really having a say in what it is to be implemented or designed or whatever. Jointly with these, with the microscale, it's becoming more and more important. The public spaces as scenarios or as windows of things we want society to think about, like, for instance, sustainability. It's a superb space of for interaction of people and to come closer to the phenomena of sustainability or climate change, if we want to call it through its real name. Other issues which are related with participation and have been mentioned yesterday in yesterday's initial meeting are those linked to security. It is now an issue, a big issue in places like the UK, like Venezuela. The issue of security, which ranges from the risk of being assaulted in the streets to the risk to be assaulted in your house, and definitely the risk of being assaulted in your civil society project, whatever you want to call, environment, which is very violent, which is in the work environment, which is violated and perpetrated by a thief. So the elements that have been highlighted in this line is basically, as I was saying, security in public spaces. People, we have been told for ages now, for decades now, that public spaces are necessarily not places to stay. Public spaces are places to go through, to go by, to surround, eventually to consume, to buy, because there might be events going on in a square. That's actually one of its original vocations. But let me. Are you talking with them on your own, or this is? Sorry, let me catch up with the.
I think we can go through the chat if you want.
Yeah, that's what I'm going to do. So that's to take back the narration. I'm talking about one of the three elements that I'm going to deal with in these sessions along the next month. I'm in the third one, which is public space and participation. I'm saying how important participation is, and I'm trying to introduce in these topics the ideas that were put on the table yesterday by the publics. Now I'm going to stop a little bit for a minute and go to the chat, which is very, very hot, and you can see the smoke coming out from my screen with this chat, in which people are talking about very important things like comments and okay, what is someone is calling about something which I don't know, which I would like to ask, so which is, what is swarm intelligence? Can I have some feedback on that? Okay, so what we have here is that someone has a smoke coming out, and it's great. It's like swarm intelligence is something like a living organism, so it act like swarm intelligence. Es lo mismo que inteligencia colectiva, okay. Swarming intelligence is like collective intelligence. Como las personas por intuición dan forma a determinadas estructuras. Exactly, this is a very interesting thing. It's how I was actually referring to this issue when we talk about the functions of public spaces, and we're talking about these potential functions. A lot of them are just basically the potential functions of public space are those which are the result of bottom-up processes of appropriations, of devolutions, of reappropriations of public space. Things happen often in public space in a completely unplanned way, and this is, of course, the rich and the beauty of public spaces. And this can range from how kids play in a specific corner of the park, of a square, using any element as a toy or as an amenity to play. It ranges from there to empty plots being turned into parks or being turned into playgrounds by people that really want to transform the city. And I think this is a very interesting span in which we can really think about the different possibilities and the different not limitations. We don't want to think about limitations today or in this session. We're going to be very positive and think about possibilities. But beyond all, what we have been also mentioned and discussed is the capacity of people in this line of maybe swarm intelligence, the capacity of people of developing new functions, new uses of public space. And I think we have to mention the elements that have been, not the elements, the events, sorry, that have been taking place in countries, in very different countries, like ranging from Spain, Israel, Egypt, Tunisia, Greece, of course, Athens, in which public spaces have been seized and have been appropriated and have been occupied in a very, very, sometimes more, others less, in a very creative way. In recalling back to the early session, to the beginning of the session, in ways in which people didn't really know what was going on, and creating and developing. Probably I didn't have a chance to look at the link of the swarm intelligence, but definitely creating some issues what we can call collective intelligence or collective sensitivity, which is a concept which is very interesting to relate and just to start finishing. I'm going to make a loop back to the beginning of this short presentation or discussion, which is about the historical dimension of public spaces. And of course, if we take and we read this wonderful article by David Harvey, about the public space in Paris. There's one about the Sacré-Cœur, and there's another one about Haussmann, etc. It is very interesting to see how in the late 19th century and early 20th century, from the social sciences, there was an interest in studying and understanding the reactions of people in public spaces, how what they were calling those days the masses could or should react in public spaces when they're in a big number. So we have to think in the work of Le Bon, which was a social psychologist of the moment in those days, in which he talks about the alienation of the masses and how people lose control of themselves because they feel alienated in a specific situation of violence or tension or stress. And they're of course trying to explain how important it is to have a physical control of public space and a physical control over the people in order to avoid the masses, the mob, losing control and challenging and even breaking into the natural order, the natural political order and social order. And this is exactly what has happened in our country in a very specific way, but in other places like Egypt in a more, I would say, confrontational way, in which people, it's not that they are alienated, but they suddenly feel supported. It's a number of individuals, a number of alienated individuals break their alienation by coming together, by filling what in the 19th century we would call a mob, but which is now a mass, a creative mass, an intelligent mass, a group of people, and therefore ideally a community of people, and a spontaneous community of people that is in the streets, is marching, is taking action. And I think this is a very nice way of looking at it. Also as a emancipatory quality of public spaces with people. And therefore, this is so important to tackle the fourth dimension I'm talking about, we will be talking about, which is how to make these public spaces dynamic, how to participate. Mm-hmm. How can we participate? How can we influence or construct, design places? All these theories of placemaking. And we are coming into another interesting topic, which is how cities are used as war devices. Exactly. There's this story that I was told when I was in the university by a professor, which was from Argentina, and this guy who was in his late 30s, early 40s, he had, I'm talking about 20 years ago, so he had spent some years already in Spain, and he had this experience about the dictatorship and the big square, the big public space that you have in front of the Casa Rosada, of the government house. So he was talking to me how when he was a student in university, there was, in the middle of dictatorship, it was a ferocious repression. People were being abducted by paramilitary or by the military themselves. Well, all these stories we know, which are something that is breathtaking and horrible situation. And he was a communist, and he was involved in politics, and he was engaged with political groups in which a lot of professors were also engaged. And one day it happens that the Falkland, the Malvinas War erupts, and to his surprise, to his desperation, he sees how a lot of his comrades, of his colleagues that have been risking their lives, dying, or maybe not dying, but being arrested and going through very harsh times and very harsh situations, were instantly supporting the war because it was motherland, because it was it was something that should stop every Argentinian from conflict, and would just bring us all together. And he's mentioning this cathartical meeting in the Casa Rosada, in the Plaza de Mayo, in front of the Casa Rosada, in which the current dictator, was it Altieri, which was completely drunk and in a state of almost unconsciousness, he was speeching and addressing the masses to go to war. And a lot of the people who had been fighting against this dictatorship were there and were in a state of nationalistic or patriotic catharsis. So I certainly agree with this idea of using public spaces for certain purposes which are not really acceptable in a lot of cases. But also we have to think that public spaces lately, with the eruption of new technologies, are becoming spaces of emancipation and of transformation of the city, of political institutions, and certainly of people. This is a message that the guys from Tahrir Square in Egypt were transmitting me when I was talking to them about what they were feeling. It was public space and being there together, and were just making us citizens, were making us free. Just the fact of being there with people you don't know and being afraid, scared to death, but together. And that's something that can only excuse me can only happen in urban spaces in nowadays. So I think it's time more or less to to stop. I'm really interested in what the debate is going on down there. Yeah, when we're talking about, there's something by Eva. When we say private public space, we have to make a difference between gated communities and malls and similars. Do you think gated communities are public spaces? They have their own common spaces, which are shared by the owners or the people that have access to it. I wouldn't say they're specifically public spaces. Um, I would call privatized public spaces of definitely the malls, uh, some facilities like in the case of Madrid that we have been built a golf course literally in the middle of the city, and that's privately managed, and you have to pay to go in and to use some of the facilities. It is part of it. It's a park, so it's free access, but others are. So that would be uh, privatized public space, um, as it is also when following a very important trend, a very current trend. Um, you have a hard square in which there is a continuous flow of events, of sponsor events, of presentations of products, private, etc. Private companies offering renting, so to speak, the space to do that. That's a public space which is turned private uh, all the time, with this excuse or the argumentation of saying, okay, we need to use the public space, we need to keep it busy, and therefore we engage with all these companies to do the things here. But there are other ways of making private space um, busy, and like maybe terraces or putting playgrounds for kids or facilities for youngsters, for age people. So if it's about having people in a public space, you really need to think in the design, and you really need to think what you want it to happen there, not just to sell it or rent it on a regular basis to keep it busy. Yeah, structure public spaces. Well, this is a bit. It's a bit. It's a bit. I think complicated. What do you mean by structure? What do you mean by structure public spaces?
Structure.
You mean okay, connected, linked, structure. Okay. Hmm. Yeah, yeah. Well, this is something that is existing, but it's still. If you, I think I'm very. I think we should mm, talk about or be aware of what we're talking about. On the one side, we talk about structure spaces. We're talking about the quality of the design of the public space in itself, and a quality in physical terms, which I think is very important. And connection is essential to generate dynamics in public spaces, uh, connectivity, accessibility. Um, relation of a resort. But still, if you have all that, but you don't have uh, an attraction, or you have things that de-incentivate the use of public spaces, that might be a problem too. So I think we should elaborate in this idea of a structured public spaces if we understand them as linked or communicated or accessible between them. Mm. Okay. Any other topics about the gated communities? I think it's a very perverse way of saying of calling public space, but certainly the people that consume those spaces are very keen on perceiving it as a public space, or as I was saying before, as a common zone or a common space. This is becoming a classic in Spanish urbanism, most of the enlargement of the cities, Madrid, Sevilla, Valladolid, Valencia, are built on the basis um, of square buildings with four sides, with a big garden or courtyard inside, in which kids can play and not exposed to the company of other people other than the one in the house. And they might be a swimming pool. So this is a very sexy urban form for middle classes, which have been basically immigrated to the outskirts, to this new suburbia, this kind of vertical sprawl that has been taking place in a lot of places in Spain, because they cannot really pay anything in the center, and they have the incentive of all these amenities, like maybe a gym or a couple of garage spaces or parking spaces, swimming pool, very attractive, and a kind of zona común. This kind of offering is very tempting. There's something about participation for the last 2 minutes. Oh man, about participation. Can participation be regarded as legitimation of the existing system? That's the great question. I think we should think about that question for the future. But think about that participation can be process that starts bottom up. That starts from the community, from the grassroots, from the people, from individuals, to try to transform, in this case, their physical environment, public space. So it can be bottom up with different degrees of success, different degrees of different strategies to manage to go through, but also participation can be top down. And generally, when we think about participation and we analyze the tools or the devices that people, citizens, have to participate, generally we're talking about things that are as harmless as possible to the institutions, to the power, to the city or the region. Generally, it is this way. In some cases, you have very interesting horizontal uh, devices of participation that grant unexpected results. But the common thing is that the city, the institutions accept to introduce participation generally when there is some sort of control over the outcomes. Because they're not binding, they're not compulsory for compulsory implementation, or because they're just partially binding, or because they deal with issues which are completely irrelevant for the what are you saying, for the definition of the city, or for transcendental transformations or change in the city. Okay, so we have a look to that, and I think we can. But also, there are very nice examples, and some of them are in Madrid, are strictly related with public space appropriation. And probably 10 years ago, nobody would have said that's participation, because participation has been understood as something very linked to political stakeholders, to grassroots organizations and the city, and managing conflict. But now these things are taking place in a way in which the city sometimes is not able to react. It's too fast, and we're talking about individuals or about groups that just pop out through the internet and suddenly appropriate from an empty plot and demand the city some backing. So sometimes it's the city who has to legitimize participatory experiences of appropriation rather than the other. There are obviously not a majority, but since I really want to have a very positive tone in these, or positive or constructive or hoping tone in this whole experience, let's take it that way. But of course, participation is a very dangerous thing, depending on who wants to, what wants the power to do with it.
I would like to say something.
So Francesco is going to.
Hi, everybody. So I would like to say something. I'm here just to help Andres with the workshop, and I would like to remind that the next session, I mean the first session of Public Spaces and People, is scheduled for October the 4th. I'm trying to open the calendar. It's not working. Your PC Andres is not very.
I know. It needs some more love.
Yeah. Anyway, you can check on dreamhammer.org the public calendar of Public Space and People. So October the 4th is on Tuesday. We have the first session with Google Hangout for network design. So it's going to be like yesterday. And for those who are not registered, I remind that registration is open. We have still 1 or 2 places available. So here is the calendar. Just check it out and stay with us at the beginning of October. Thank you very much for following us today. Maybe Andres want to say you goodbye.
Goodbye. Thank you for being around, and thank you for the for very intensive chat and debate. So I'm looking forward to see all those links and keep on building arguments for more debates in the future. So thank you very much. Bye bye.